Aaron Rodgers, Jay, 65% available. Huge fantasy performance against Jacksonville, which would be taken with a grain of salt. But the good news is he does have the Rams, who haven't exactly been a lights-out secondary.
No, and the issue is, though, that the Rams, their pass rush is really strong. That's the strength of the team, so it's going to be on Rodgers to be able to avoid that pass rush when it comes. Your man, Olive Shanu, playing at left tackle seems to have really helped. He's made massive strides, but I mean, what did you think about how Rodgers played against Jacksonville? Because he gets the stats. He has the 3 passing touchdowns, even runs 6 times for 45 yards, which he probably won't do again, but he goes 16 for 30 against the Jags defense.
Well, 2 things. Number 1, the obvious. The secondary lapses that Jacksonville has is nearly unprecedented. Like, you watch them week after week, and there's just people running wide open behind them, and you're just confused how safeties keep allowing this to happen. So that's not sustainable. But number 2, Pat, what's interesting to me with Rodgers is when he looked injured through a lot of this year, he'd snap the ball and he'd stare at the rush and he'd start to anxiously move around and almost run himself into sacks. Against Jacksonville, where he had 45 rushing yards, he'd snap the ball, he'd drop back, he'd hang in the pocket because Olu's been a lot better at left tackle than Tyron Smith. And then if the play went on way too long, then he would just take the run that he had right in front of him rather than running himself into a sack. So he looks a lot better. Yes, it was Jacksonville, but physically he looks a lot better, where I do think there's some kind of fantasy floor now against the Rams if you have to play him.
There absolutely is. And yeah, his signature play for the first 2/3 of the season was self-sacking. It was kind of like, dude, like, you just got to retire. And, at the Roto Football Show, we've been making fun of, like, every week, it seems like he'll launder through someone on the national media. Like Aaron Rodgers, you thought he had 3 injuries. He actually has 5 injuries. And, possibly 6 or 7. We're honestly losing count. The fact that he has looked better, even more mobile. It's not like he looks mobile, but he looks more mobile the past 2 weeks. Somehow leading the Jets and rushing on Sunday does lend credence to the notion that he was playing hurt. And the Rams, they could go either way as a matchup. But the last time they didn't play in a rainstorm against Brock Purdy, they did allow the greatest fantasy quarterback performance of all time to Josh Allen. A little bit different skill sets between Josh Allen and Aaron Rodgers at this point, but Aaron Rodgers, like, this is kind of a sad legacy, but it also seems like he's in legacy mode. Like, he knows these could be the final few games of his career. He's throwing it all out there, and you don't feel great about it. But kind of, as you said, he's reestablished a floor. He has reestablished a ceiling too. I mean, Devontae Adams, good matchup, but still, even in a good matchup, to have the second best game of your career is great. And the floor is back a little. Ceiling is even in the mix, and Aaron Rodgers is unfortunately a good streamer for Week 16. I say unfortunately because he's someone who's so hard to trust after not producing. But again, if you're just looking at a spreadsheet, you like Aaron Rodgers as a streamer this week.
Yeah, 2 things on top of that, and I know it's crazy we're talking ourselves into starting Aaron Rodgers, but number 1, I think the Jets defense is going to have a brutal time against the Rams, where the Jets are going to be chasing points in this game and having to throw. Number 2, it is hilarious watching them get to the goal line, and instead of just handing the ball typically to Breece Hall or Braylon Allen, they are trying to compile stats to Devontae Adams. Like, legitimately, they are trying to stat pad legacy stats for more Devontae Rodgers touchdowns as a duo, and it's a real thing. And, like, we can laugh at it, and it is funny, but it's fantasy relevant.
What does Rodgers think is going to happen? Does he think that people are going to consider his legacy different because he had 3 extra touchdowns to Devontae Adams?
I really think this is a thing.
Completely insane.
Yeah.
But no, it seems like a real thing. The master of checking in to the goal line pass.
Our next quarterback here, guys, and our last quarterback, Drake Maye against the Bills, 87% available, Pat. Drake Maye, it's been an up and down rookie season. I think he's made the most of what he's working with New England. Not a good offensive line, not a lot of weapons. The coaching is up and down. But you can always hope for a rushing touchdown, which kind of gives him maybe some starting viability. What do you think about this against the Bills where, I mean, once again, this is a team that could be chasing a lot of points. They'll be big underdogs.
I do think it's going to be all about the rushing. And I do think when it comes to Drake Maye, this is a spot where I prefer someone like Aaron Rodgers or maybe even Russell Wilson. Depends on George Pickens. Maybe even Jameis if he keeps the job. Or I know we just saw Matthew Stafford and Jared Goff go off against the Bills, all the way off against the Bills. But where those are veterans that we know can feast and come back game script. The odds to seem a little too high to me that a rookie with the super limited supporting cast and Drake Maye, where they might go off the rails, and instead of compiling stats and comeback game script, he's taking sacks, he's losing fumbles. And it's going to be so much about the rushing, which is a hard bet to place. And I just think there's too high a chance that Drake Maye just gets teed off on by the Bills. But there is a case to be made with the legs. But it is a week where I think I'd rather go with one of those more traditional pocket pass. Not that Drake Maye's not a pocket passer, but one of the more certified, established options than Drake Maye in a game where I just think he could take 6-7 sacks, lose 2 fumbles, toss a pick. I worry about him in the comeback game script against the Bills.
Controversial opinion, Connor, but I think Drake Maye has been the second best rookie quarterback this season after Jaden Daniels, who I think is tier 1 by himself. But Drake Maye has a better passer rating than Bo Nix, higher QBR, higher success rate as a passer, and I think he's got less around him.
He has no help.
He has higher EPA per play than CJ Stroud this season. I think it's gone a little bit under the radar how solid Maye has been in a fairly hopeless context. And before you yell at me, Broncos fans, I'm leading the charge for Patrick Surtain, Defensive Player of the Year. Love the Broncos, but I think Drake Maye, because of the rushing ability, and I think that he's probably been a bit better than a passer than expected behind what is maybe the worst offensive line in football, and I think he's getting progressively better.
I think he's performed above expectations when you look at what he's been thrown into right now. This is unfortunately not a well-coached team. It's not a very talented team, and this is a player that coming out of UNC, you could sit there and go, man, he could really use a year on the bench, and was not afforded that year on the bench. So I'm with you. I think Drake Maye's been pretty impressive when you consider not only what he's dealing with, but also the fact that, I mean, once again, he has a lot of problems coming into the league, and I think he's working through them while not getting any help around him and being able to lift him up. Yeah. So it's based on situation. Go ahead, Pat.
It's just been so impressive in real life. I mean, 8.5 yards per carry is insane. It's only 2 rushing touchdowns, though, and the touchdown passing potential is just so limited because, like you said, because of the supporting cast, that it does seem like a spiked week is just not the most likely outcome for him.
Yeah.
But totally agree from a real life perspective. And I mean, listen, I know that he's picking his spots when he's scrambling, but 8.5 yards per carry is insane. Maybe he's overdue for a spiked week, a regression to the spiked week mean, if that's a real thing. But it just seems like it's been more the classic better in real life than fantasy.
I completely agree. All right, some deep league quarterback waiver targets. Cooper Rush, he's got the Bucks. He's 92% available. The Bucks are obviously really tough on the back end. They're 30th in pass defense on the season. Mac Jones, he's got the Raiders. Mac Jones has actually been okay. And more importantly, he's feeding Brian Thomas Jr. And then, as you hinted at, Pat, we're kind of waiting to see if Jameis Winston will officially be the starter. But if he's got the Bengals, he at least becomes interesting off of sheer volume, right, Pat?
Well, he's got the Bengals. I hate to say it, I'm ranking him in the top 12, even with the in-game benching risk. I think pound for pound, the Bengals might be the worst defense in the NFL. And I just don't think you can overstate the impact of Jerome Ford replacing Nick Chubb, too. And it's just going to be, like I said, a more functional overall offense, one that's not in 3rd and 7 every series, maybe some 3rd and 2s, maybe some 2nd and 3s. And so I love it so much for Jameis if he can get one more start. Cooper Rush, all I'll say is when you attempt 35 to 40 passes, like crazy stuff can happen. Dallas, we know, is going to have to throw in this game. The Bucs allow the 2nd most quarterback fantasy points. They're way stingier on the ground than they are through the air. Cooper Rush, Hail Mary. But he's a legit QB2 super flex Hail Mary. But yeah, my favorite streamer is still Jameis, even though they do seem like they're just dying to bench. Even if they don't bench him on Wednesday, it seems like they're dying to bench him his first turnover. But I'm willing to take that risk.
Hey, it's Matthew Berry from NBCSports.com and RotoWorld.com, and I want to thank you so much for watching whatever it is you just watched, or if nothing else, being too lazy to click out of the autoplay after this video started, after whatever it is you actually wanted to watch finished. But now that you're here, I'd like to take a moment here to ask you respectfully now, okay? I'm asking you respectfully to subscribe to the NFL on NBC YouTube channel. You'll get the latest RotoWorld fantasy news headlines, all sorts of great shows, including my own Fantasy Football Happy Hour. So go subscribe now. Again, I'm asking respectfully.